Something unprecedented is unfolding in Washington right now, and it's not coming from Democrats. For the first time, Republicans are pushing back against Donald Trump. They're moving quietly but deliberately to block the power he's trying to consolidate at any cost. Emergency declarations, war-level rhetoric, behind-the-scenes panic. Congress is stepping in to draw a line. This isn't just another political skirmish or a breaking news moment. This is a test of whether American power is governed by law or by one man's instincts. Stay with me until the end because what's unfolding here could reshape how power works in the United States long after the headlines fade. Picture this scene late at night in Washington. Phones lighting up across Capitol Hill, aides whispering in hallways, senators checking their screens twice, making sure what they're reading is real. Because the President of the United States is furious, not at Democrats, not at the media, but at his own party. And for the first time in years, the rebellion isn't coming from protesters outside the gates. It's coming from inside the walls. That's where the real danger always begins. Republicans are revolting against Donald Trump. And no, this isn't the usual MAGA infighting or anonymous leaks designed to spook donors. This is something deeper, colder, and far more consequential because it strikes at the one thing Trump believes he cannot survive without: unchecked power. The reason this revolt matters goes beyond broken promises, though those exist too. Whether it's the vow of no new wars, the soaring cost of living, or unanswered questions about long-promised disclosures that never arrive. What makes this different is that Republican lawmakers themselves are openly moving against the very authority Trump is desperate to hold. And when the guardrails inside the system start to activate, presidents don't respond calmly. They escalate. They dramatize. They declare emergencies. That's exactly what we're watching unfold right now. A presidency leaning hard into spectacle and crisis language to protect itself from internal collapse. At the heart of this revolt is a simple but alarming reality that even seasoned Washington veterans are struggling to say out loud. The President of the United States has been publicly entertaining the idea of using military force in ways that could drag America into conflict, not with some distant adversary, but with its own allies. When Senator Chris Murphy laid this out in blunt terms, it landed like a shockwave. Because once you strip away the bluster and the branding, you're left with a scenario that sounds absurd until you remember we've stopped being allowed to dismiss these statements as jokes. Greenland is not a blank space on a real estate map. It's part of Denmark. Denmark is a NATO ally, and NATO's core principle is collective defense. Any military action against that territory isn't just symbolic. It's a legal and strategic nightmare that theoretically places the United States in direct conflict with Europe. The fact that lawmakers now have to seriously explain this to the public is itself a sign of how unmoored the conversation has become. No one in America voted for a presidency that risks a shooting war with allies over land acquisition rhetoric. Yet here we are parsing comments, weighing hypotheticals, and watching members of Trump's own party quietly, but firmly try to close the door before it gets kicked open. This is where Trump's worldview becomes critical to understanding the backlash. He doesn't process geopolitics as alliances or treaties or shared security obligations. He processes it like property, like leverage, like a deal that can be forced if you push hard enough. That mindset might work in a boardroom. In global politics, it gets people killed. Republican senators know this. They understand that once a president frames military action as an option, the machinery starts moving whether Congress likes it or not. Which is why the War Powers Act suddenly became the battlefield, not as an abstract constitutional debate, but as an emergency brake. And when that brake was pulled, when Republicans joined Democrats to advance a resolution limiting the president's ability to act unilaterally, Trump didn't respond with negotiation or persuasion. He responded with rage, profanity, and threats. Because that's what happens when someone who believes power is personal realizes it's actually conditional. The reported phone call to Senator Susan Collins wasn't just about one vote. It was about the shock of discovering that loyalty has limits, that even in his own party, there are lines that can't be crossed without resistance. For Trump, that resistance feels existential. His entire second-term strategy hinges on projecting strength, inevitability, and control. Nothing undermines that faster than members of your own party publicly telling you no, especially when the issue at stake is war, authority, and constitutional boundaries. This is where the narrative accelerates. Faced with pushback, Trump doesn't retreat. He reframes. He reaches for the language of emergency, declaring extraordinary measures not just as policy tools but as political weapons. The declaration of a national emergency tied to Venezuelan oil assets fits perfectly into this pattern. It allows him to cast himself as the sole protector of national security while portraying dissenting lawmakers as obstacles, even though the underlying reality is far more complicated, involving long timelines, massive corporate interests, uncertain infrastructure, and benefits that would flow primarily to multinational energy companies rather than ordinary Americans. But complexity has never been the point. The point is dominance, distraction, and control of the narrative, because emergencies change the rules. Emergencies centralize authority. Emergencies shift attention away from uncomfortable questions. And there are few questions more uncomfortable for this administration right now than why long-promised transparency efforts have stalled, why document releases have been delayed, and why it took bipartisan pressure rather than executive initiative to move certain oversight actions forward. When lawmakers start talking openly about inspectors general, compliance failures, and unanswered timelines, it signals something important, not a conclusion, not an accusation, but concern that process itself has broken down. That concern is exactly what Trump cannot afford. His political survival depends not just on winning arguments, but on exhausting the public, flooding the zone, and keeping every controversy competing for oxygen. These threads, Republican revolt, war powers, emergency declarations, stalled disclosures, aren't separate stories. They're the same story viewed from different angles. A presidency trying to outrun accountability by accelerating chaos. And Republicans who once waved everything through are now calculating the cost of silence, weighing institutional damage against party loyalty, and realizing that if they don't act now, they may not recognize the system later. Because once a president openly suggests he is guided only by his own judgment and not by law, treaties, or precedent, the question stops being partisan. It becomes structural. That's the moment we're in. Behind closed doors, Republicans are asking themselves whether stopping Trump is an act of betrayal or an act of preservation. History doesn't remember who tweeted the loudest. It remembers who stepped in when the rules were bending past their breaking point. This revolt, quiet in some places, explosive in others, may be the first real sign that the internal guardrails are finally being tested. Not by the opposition, but by those who know exactly how dangerous unchecked power can become when it's wrapped in grievance, spectacle, and the language of permanent emergency.